So I'm very happy to introduce to the stage Mr. Paul Alger, International Business Director from the UK Fashion and Textile Association, and Aime Fundani, Director International Marketplaces from the Trendyol Marketplace. Hello, Paul. Hello, Aime. Please sit here. I will be on this side. I finally managed to get a dusty table out of the green room.
You've come to the right country for dusty tables.
That's a good start. So yeah, thank you for doing this with us and with me. Thank you for being here. And for, I think we should start off first of all that you introduce yourselves, because many British people might know you, but not all of them. You might be introducing yourself and tell us what you do for a living and what you do when you're not working, maybe. It's a favorite thing.
You are almost sounding like Cilla Black, who is a very famous TV presenter who was used to start off her interviews with "What's your name and where do you come from?" So good morning and thank you for inviting me to join you today. I'm Paul Alger from the UK Fashion and Textile Association. I've worked for the UK Fashion and Textile Association for the last 34 years. Probably makes me the oldest person in the building at the moment. And my main occupation tends to be taking UK brands to wholesale, international trade shows, but also, and I'm sure we'll talk about this as we go on, trying to navigate the complicated route of how do you build your digital business online without cannibalizing your wholesale business. And my guess is that that's actually impossible anyway. But so that's the challenge that we set ourselves. When I'm not working, I'm usually found wandering around the streets of southwest London, following after two dogs who perhaps have not been the most well trained. Two mini schnauzers who take me for walks on a regular basis. So that's me in a nutshell.
Did you say schnauzer?
Schnauzers.
This is the word in English, right?
Yes.
This is German as well.
Yep, they're German dogs.
Didn't know that. Okay, so you go out with the schnauzers. That's nice. Aime, how about you?
Yeah, sure. First of all, thank you for having me as well, and happy to share the stage today with you, Paul and Alex. I'm Aime. I'm actually leading the international marketplace at Trendyol. For those who don't know Trendyol is actually one of the largest e-commerce platform in the EMEA region. Just to share a couple of numbers, we deliver almost 500 million parcels every year and move about 750 million items at Trendyol. However, Trendyol is actually pretty fresh for me. I joined it only early this year, and I joined it because Trendyol has decided since a year to move away from our home turf, Turkey, and to go international, and has done that pretty aggressively, and now we actually since a couple of months also launched the international marketplace in June, started to onboard our first sellers. And we're going to go live with TradeByte next month, actually. So that's also the reason we are here today.
Thanks for mentioning that.
And so what I've been doing. So just to share very quickly. So Trendyol has been for me a new experience. After working for almost 20 years for Western-founded companies and in different e-commerce industries. I decided to take the leap and discover something a bit new, get out of my comfort zone from that perspective, and the experience has been really great so far. And so what do I do outside of work? I'm a big sport fan, follow different type of sport, try to do some sport myself. I also have an interest in dogs. I have a Jack Russell, a very intense dog to keep up with. Okay. However, I'm also a fresh dad since 3 months, so actually been spending a lot of time
Congratulations.
With my newborn son, actually.
Oh, that keeps you busy. I know.
Very busy.
I know what you're talking about. I mean, that thing alone that you run a marketplace from Turkey, and we're talking about the UK also later, two special situations with the EU as the one to go in with and the one to partner up with. But Just to give this maybe a bit of a start, would you rate the state of international fashion business on a scale from 0 to 10 at the moment? What would you think?
Shall I start?
Yeah, start off.
So I would give it a good 7.
Well,
Because I am still optimistic. I know that the current market conditions are particularly difficult. Maybe without the current situation, maybe it would have been even an 8. And the reason is because I think that the fundamentals that enabled international development are still good, are still strong. Particularly if you look at it from the online standpoint, right? E-commerce is still growing in most markets. There are constant improvements in the capabilities from if you think about it from the reach with social medias. Constant innovation, improvement in logistics, which make it faster and cheaper to deliver. At the moment, of course, there is the inflation that comes into play as well to consider, but in general, right? So if we take a step back, these things are improving. And of course, there are also platforms like ours, which are actually there to allow sellers, brands, retailers to be able to access new markets at pretty fast, at a relatively efficient cost, and limiting their operational risks.
Mm-hmm.
No, this is a good 7, I would say. Paul, what do you still think?
I'd probably say more closer to 6 from our point of view, because and I should probably qualify that, because of course the part of the market that we work with, which is around wholesale, tends to be around premium products made in the UK or designed in the UK and manufactured hopefully as close to home as we can get them. And so those markets are really struggling at the moment, because you have China has been closed for the last 2.5, 3 years. We've had the global pandemic, which has seen a lot of companies shift online very successfully, and that was growing. But the Russian invasion of Ukraine has, and this is not just a UK perspective, the Italians are also very sensitive to this. Those markets that we were relying on for growth when we come out of the pandemic are more difficult, added to the fact that, and I think somebody has mentioned Brexit already, the UK now has a more difficult trading relationship with physical goods going from the UK into the EU and back. So we're in a situation at the moment, particularly from the UK, where our largest supply chain and export market is more complicated and more expensive to supply. The markets, with the exception of the US, which is our number 1 export market for UK fashion and textiles, and that is working very well. With the exception of that, the rest of the world is quite difficult. Japan is very sluggish at the moment. China is very difficult. Korea is doing very well, for example, for a lot of our members. But we were all hoping that Russia and Ukraine would pick up a lot of British lingerie and knitwear, and that does not look very likely. So
yeah, okay.
6 is
rather a 6. But there's room to go, of course. But let's focus maybe a bit on the UK situation, because we have you here and you've been doing that for so long. I mean, obviously, cross-border fashion retail is a fact, is reality. And as you said, it maybe the conditions are better than ever to do so. For example, I found a number on your website that over 9 billion worth of goods every year are shipped from UK textile industry. I mean, that's a huge number. I don't know about the other industries in the UK, but it seems to me that's a very big factor in overall industry perspective. So, but yeah, I wanted to have this rather controversial statement at the beginning. We just had that a bit, that international fashion retail is more difficult, but also more unpredictable maybe than ever. Speaking of the UK to the world, what would you think?
I think the world is more unpredictable anyway. I think the whole world is more unpredictable. I think and looking at the figures you've quoted, the £9 billion worth of exports of UK fashion and textiles to the rest of the world, that's only the physical merchandise that we ship from the UK, because those are the only figures that we were talking earlier on about data. Those are the only figures that you can capture, because those are the only figures that Her Majesty's Revenue, or His Majesty's now, Revenue and Customs will capture when the goods leave our shores. But for example, if you were looking at a business like Paul Smith, who might be manufacturing in Italy and around the world, those figures would be much higher because, of course, they're not capturing. So a lot of the goods that we're selling to Japan will never be captured in any of these official statistics. So when we talk about data, I'm always a little bit skeptical because I know that, for example, we always talk about the US as being our number one export market because physically it is. But actually Japan, statistically, is way down the list. But in reality, for most of our brands not manufacturing in the UK, it is still their number one export market. So, but I think the world is so, I think everyone's quite worried at the moment. I think the UK perspective is that we are, the relationship between the UK and the EU is complicated, it's tricky, it's not necessarily governed by business concerns, it's more governed by political decisions which are beyond our control. So one of the things that we end up doing a lot is trying to second guess what that's going to be. And so the special relationship between the UK and the United States is a very important one. The fact that consumers can import £800 and $800 per day of goods without duty applying is a really good thing. I wake up every morning and wonder when the Americans are going to stop that, but they don't. But that compares with only $20 if you were selling to Canada, for example, and 135 euros if you were, 135 or 150 euros going into the EU. So it's very difficult to compare different markets because each one works very differently.
I mean, that's difficult. We have that kind of, maybe we agree on that is, as you said, the world is unpredictable in a way, which also makes it for every industry to be unpredictable. But how, Aime, does that come together then with a growth strategy? I mean, if something's unpredictable, you rather be cautious, or you say, no, well, come on, we take it in our own hands in a way.
For sure. No, so I would agree, right? I think we all agree that the world is definitely unpredictable. It makes business more difficult to plan and steer. And this, I think, is across the board, right? And of course, there are markets that are more difficult to enter than others. That's very clear. However, what we see as well is that, with the right strategies, using the right partners, actually, it's possible to continue to work on an international level, right? And of course, the decisions needs to be made, according, of course, on certain priorities, and based on, your ability to invest in those specific markets. And that's also basically, the strategy we are following as well on our end.
Because Paul mentioned the manufacturing part of this discussion, just comes to my mind. You have also own fashion labels.
Indeed.
And you operate from a country that is very well known for manufacturing, so that is not a problem for you. You manufacture all your own labels in Turkey, right?
We do produce, roughly, in our own market, our private label correspond roughly to 10% of our GMV. So produced in Turkey, sold in Turkey, but now also sold in Europe. And even though there are, custom processes to follow from, when you're shipping products from Turkey to Europe and so forth, we are able to do it, and we are able to do it actually quite efficiently, because today, an end customer ordering from, Trendyol, our platform, can receive products from Turkey directly in 4 or 5 days, and without having to pay any custom duties, because we take care of that for them. So that's why there is definitely still opportunities to follow on an international level.
So what would you say, both of you, to be honest here, which custom regulations are more difficult, the Turkish ones or the UK ones at the moment?
The customs.
Yeah, customs,
From a UK export point of view, Spain is really tricky at the moment. They read through every dot, comma, circumflex on a label and make it as difficult as possible for us to sell, and that is a real problem. I think on the horizon we're going to have an issue with Turkey as well, because Turkey is pushing for a made in Turkey label which does not effectively, adequately, in English at least, describe where the goods are made. And again, I mentioned earlier on decisions made for political reasons. This is not an economic decision, it's a political decision. The United States has already said that they will not accept made in Turkey as a description of made in Turkey. The UKFTA position has been that the UK probably should not either. But that at the moment you're going to have to dual label. So if it is made in Turkey, it's going to have to say made in Turkey in English, in the same way that we would expect it to say hergestellt in Türkei in German or fabriqué en Turquie in French. So those are the little problems on the horizon. But Spain is a real problem. And the sadness, I suppose, for us is that the largest, export market for us, which has traditionally been the European Union, is now a real minefield. And so companies are having to invest very heavily in infrastructure and logistics to get their goods into the European Union, which is taking away budget that they might ordinarily have invested in things like their own platform, their own websites, their own advertising campaigns. And that is a short-term challenge, I think, for the next 18 months.
I mean, you already mentioned that you'll be able to deliver 5 days without any costs or any difficulties for the customer. That is a promise, right? So
yeah, that's a promise. But of course, when we're looking at it, for instance, also we see UK as a great potential, and indeed for us at the moment it's a bit more difficult to work with the UK specifically. But it's definitely a country we want to also come here at some point. We had to change a bit priorities, due to market conditions as well, and I think a lot of businesses have been sort of like be more careful about how they spend their cash in current market conditions. So we had to postpone a little bit, for instance, our plans to launch actually a localized UK website with a local experience. But still, we're working on it.
If this is kind of, Paul, what you elaborated on, if this is common sense in the industry and pretty much everyone feels the same way, what is there to be done? So what should be done, and what are they doing maybe to improve the situation? Because this is really, I mean, that sounds like deliberately hindering people from being successful, like looking at the labels and all that stuff, right?
It's a very good question, and it's one to which there's not an easy answer, I have to say. I mean, these decisions are taken for non-business reasons, and I think that we're in the UK position, and the European positions are fairly entrenched as well. There are other political considerations going on that make some of these conversations very difficult. And as I would say from my observation, no problem was ever solved by ignoring the fact that it existed in the first place. And we have seen quite a lot of that so far, particularly close to home. But I think the new government, the new Prime Minister, is much more aware of the importance of international trade because, and I'm hoping here, she has spent the last 3 years going around the world securing international agreements with countries like Turkey, North Africa, Japan, Korea, Canada, for example. So my hope is that we will see a more business-friendly international trade policy for the UK. My concern remains that we're having to spend so much money to get goods into and out of the European Union. There aren't that many other markets that are growing or have been growing. And the overall feeling in the UK is that because UK households are going to be disproportionately badly affected by the rise in fuel costs, then as we get to the end of the year, even before Christmas, the perception is that we will see that household expenditure in the UK is squeezed. So we're already seeing that the online take-up, which was so powerful in the UK during COVID, is also slowing down as well. So there are a number of challenges on the horizon, but looking to the big markets, certainly the United States continues to grow for the UK, and it's one of our big priorities. But as to how do you get politicians in particular to understand the business community, that's a challenge.
I mean, that's a problem that has been existing for longer now, but maybe that was never that difficult, especially for the UK in this ex-position as they are at the moment since the Brexit. what do you think if you would take a look into the wishing well? So you already mentioned that it's quite okay, the operations, but what could be even better if you could, let's say, 2 things put in the wishing well that should come true in terms of international cross-border?
Of course, if I would be very pragmatic, I would say, limit regulations, trade barriers. Those, of course, would simplify a lot, for us, the way to do business for us and our partners, definitely to do business. But I want to add something a bit aside of the question, right? And this maybe doesn't really simplify, our life, but when we look at the supply chain in general and the logistics, we're constantly looking to optimize for cost or speed, essentially, and that's what we are all trying to do constantly. But what I would like to see more effectively would be to see a bit a change in paradigm in the sense that can we start also looking a bit more from the environmental standpoint and putting the customer in the driving seat to make better educated decisions, right? And we, being such a cross-border global player, feel that we need to play a role into that, right? And so my wish would be that we continue to work on improving this transparency on the supply chain to provide this information to the customers in order to reduce also a bit the waste that we see happening, because we are, of course, I was mentioning before, we're moving a lot of parcels, a lot of goods across, multiple countries, around, millions of kilometers. And sometimes, because the customer don't know or lack the education, there is a lot of waste, so unnecessary returns, for instance. And we would like to definitely, my wish would be that we are able to improve that.
That's fantastic. So I think that's also a topic for another panel discussion, about sustainability and how can we make that whole marketplace model and supply chains more sustainable. That is a topic on its own. But nice that you mentioned that, because this is a very important aspect. And from the eye of the consumer, more than ever, maybe they really observe what's going on. And I think most of them are so well educated that the newer generations, maybe in particular, that they absolutely want the players to act like that and try to avoid this massive waste and all that stuff and pollution that comes with it. So good point here. I stay with you for a minute, Aime, because we know you manufacturing, yes, that's the one thing, and you have your own private labels, but in the end, it's a marketplace model that you are enrolling at the moment through Europe. And that's a different thing than making your own fashion lines and sell it. You more like put it together in different countries. So would you still think after the discussion and after what you mentioned yourself, that the growth strategy that you're having goes together with the marketplace model very well, and you will continue to do it? Or are there any more obstacles because of that special model where you need kind of a warehouses and whatever in every country maybe?
Yeah. So, of course, I'm a bit biased in this question. But I also want to say, the marketplace model is not a silver bullet, right? It's not it's not going to solve all your internationalization problems, definitely. I think it needs to be, thinking about marketplaces needs to be included in a, overall sort of retail strategy, whether that's a pure online or a combination of omni-channel strategy with your own e-com website, maybe retail shops, and offline footprint, and a marketplace. And the marketplace, of course, helps to continue the conversation with the customers, existing customers, in a different environment, of course, because it's a multi-seller, multi-brand environment, right? But it also sort of offers the possibility to reach out to new customers and customers that are highly qualified because they are browsing, looking for fashion, and are in general have a high intent to buy fashion products. So I think that considering this plus the services, tools that data that the marketplace offers, can really help, to sort of like, reach out to these customers. In addition, with marketplaces, more and more go fulfillment services. And fulfillment services have a lot of, pros for sellers, because they ultimately offer, the possibility to ship at a relatively cheaper cost than when you fulfill on your own, simply because marketplace moves so much volumes that they can get, better deals with, logistic partners, last mile carriers, service providers in general, but also because marketplaces are able to mutualize costs between multiple sellers, right? And so those are actually, some of the strength and pros that goes with the marketplace. However, I also want, maybe to finalize with that marketplaces also requires investment. They requires like a strong commitment in terms of resources and financial investment to actually be successful.
I mean, you always need money to do something, and that's also maybe we have that topic in the afternoon panel, that also the investments of big investors are going down at the moment, like, be a bit more careful than they were 5 years ago. We were like big spenders, so that might be an issue as well. But I would ask Paul if he agrees what Aime said about that marketplace growth scenario, and there are probably more pros than contras to that model.
Absolutely. I think we live in a multi-channel approach. So most of the companies that we work with have their own websites that are perhaps probably the majority of the work that they do now. If you look back 10 years ago, they probably were selling to department stores or independent retailers. In the UK, there are comparatively few of those. There's a myth out there that department stores are the people that give you your first breaks. I'm here to break that myth. Usually they don't. It's usually the smaller retailers that will give you your first breaks as a designer brand. So, and then the larger retailers and marketplaces will come along once there's more traction. So I think what we're seeing, and I think you mentioned it as well, is that we're seeing that the cost of getting the goods to the consumer are going up because people are having to make so many different investments. And so if I think back 5 or 10 years, a designer at Fashion Week would have put the created the collection, designed the collection, and that was about all they had to do. They could go out and sell it. Now they have to push it along a multiplicity of different channels, each one with its own cost and investment. And that's quite terrifying for a lot of these smaller businesses. So larger manufacturing businesses have manufacturing premises. They are big businesses by the very nature of the fact that they own a factory and they employ 200, 300, 400 people. But smaller designer businesses and smaller creative businesses don't have access to that money. And I've yet to come across a really good investment relationship with a small designer. It tends not to work very well. So a lot of UK brands at the moment, not just UK, are really struggling to find the investment that they need to grow their businesses, because the perception outside is that fashion isn't a good investment. Actually, on the surface of it, it may not appear to be, but when you look beneath the figures, there are lots of people in the fashion and textile industry making quite a lot of money at the moment. And you only have to look at some of these factories that I visit to see the very expensive cars parked on the forecourts. So there is money to be made. But does that money always get invested into the business? And I think the uncertainty.
Right thing you need, yeah.
People are thinking, well, where do I invest? How do I access? And smaller designers in particular often like to play with other people's money, which is an issue that we face a lot. And then something that you said earlier on, which I think is also important, just-in-time manufacturing, which is very advanced in the UK with reshoring and onshore and reshoring and nearshoring, which is very much part of the UK's approach, makes that a lot easier. So companies and brands can be much more nimble in their supplying of goods if they only have to make 50 per colour per style or 100 per colour per style in Turkey or Portugal or Tunisia, for example, or indeed in the UK, because we've seen a lot of companies relocate their manufacturing back into the UK because it's easier and it's quicker. So So I think that's a phenomenon. And I just add on to that one the concept of friendshoring, where you think, well, maybe we won't give too much money to those countries that have trained missiles at our shores, because I find I am a political animal after all, and think about those companies, those friends around the world like Turkey, for example, where we want to support their economies, where we want to be friendly and collegiate. So there are all sorts of different considerations here.
I found it interesting that you mentioned the smaller brands and that it might be harder for them to get investments. On the other hand, but that leads to another discussion maybe, there are a lot more channels to play with, speaking of social commerce, which is a panel today afternoon to promote that, which makes it easier, like a lower access barrier. And we had some conversations, Aime, about that, and also with other marketplaces, that they are really, or you are really looking out for small designers and make it possible to bring them on, because this would be win-win. The small designers have easy access to all the services that you offer, and you could say, hey, we found this little t-shirt designer from Eastern London, and he has only 200 pieces, and they are exclusively on Zalando or whatever. So that could be a very special thing. And interestingly, we tried to set up a panel discussing this, but I think this is a very new development. There were not many people willing to talk about that. And so I'm glad you mentioned that issue. So the question would be, is it really easier, or maybe there are new ways for small brands to get into that circus?
Zalando has been working in that space for the last 8 to 10 years, to my certain knowledge, and Next is also working in that space as well to a certain degree. So there's a general perception, I think, that British designers in particular are a good anchor. The challenge is always whether the consumer can afford the higher price from UK manufacturing or local manufacturing, and does the consumer. You talked about sustainability earlier on, and this is linked at the same note. We're trying to drive sustainable and ethical practices in the fashion and textile area, but that will inevitably drive higher costs, because you're going to be paying people a minimum wage if it's made here, whereas if you're making it in China or Bangladesh, the salaries are much lower. So where do you draw the line? A lot of UK brands at the moment are really struggling to get that balance between, do I manufacture it really cheaply in bulk, inflexibly in China, or do I manufacture it more flexibly, more expensively closer to home?
Absolutely, and this is, for me, this is wonderful, because finally people like me come in at that business to do storytelling, and you talked about transparency, and you tell them this is sustainable, this is made in UK, and why, and you need to communicate that and educate also the customer. You said that perfectly, and that they want that, and they are willing to pay maybe more of it. So maybe let's stay there for one last moment with you, Aime, with that also pricing and international. Would you say that if you have a marketplace in UK in the future, that this is just doubling the price, because there is so much more to do to bring the same goods that you can buy in Turkey maybe for 12 euros than to UK? So
actually, definitely UK requires now almost standalone investments, right? And that's the big challenge, because nowadays, we can build a fulfillment center, in Poland or somewhere else in Europe, and use that, fulfillment center to really ship across, all the European Union countries without, any issues. If we want to, be able to compete with local UK competitors and be at, the standards, expectation that the UK customer wants, we probably need to have a local warehouse in the UK, and this is, a major investment.
Yeah.
And that's of course we create, all the entire business case becomes much more difficult as an investor or as an operator, and that's basically the challenge we see with the UK.
Okay. Unfortunately, we're coming to an end.
Already?
Yeah, already. It's impossible. We could talk for hours.
And nobody's sung anything.
But I won't let you go without maybe some really recommendations or statements for those in the audience who already play internationally or willing to. So, like, maybe every one of you, a do and a don't, what they should do and what they absolutely should not do.
A do, I would say, take the time to plan well your internationalization, to define your strategy and plan, to select wisely your partners. Those partners need to, really care about your business, need to be able to grow and scale as you develop, and also partners that needs to be, fair and reliable over time. And maybe a don't, I would say, to go against that, don't rush. Make sure you're ready. Make sure that your organization is ready, because it's going to take time. It's going to take resources and investments. And you need to make sure that it's completely aligned with your organization.
Paul?
I would say don't write Europe off as a market from a UK perspective, because I am confident that it will come back, probably not in this parliament, but in a future parliament once things have started to settle down and renegotiations start to take place. To brands generally, I say to them usually, keep an eye on your global pricing, because if it costs 14,000 yen in Tokyo, the expectation is it will cost the equivalent here. So how do you even out that so that it is the same pricing across all of your sales channels? And to wholesale brands, I usually say again, make sure that you're not undercutting your agents and retailers and those people that are working with you initially, because they don't like it. They really, really don't like it. It's an absolute business killer. I've seen a number of our companies just kill themselves on Black Friday because they were offering discounts that nobody else in the supply chain was able to match.
Yeah.
And they really don't like it. It's a real business killer.
Okay. Wow. Thank you so much. I also have a do and a don't. So do please give a big applause for those wonderful experts here. Thank you so much for doing this with me.
Thank you.
I also have a don't. Don't miss the opportunity to come back here in the afternoon for the next panel discussion, and I'll leave you up for whatever you're up for and you applied for. Thank you for joining. It was a lot of fun here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.